All right. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to this call. I think many of you know me. I'm David Creelman. I do a lot of research and writing on human resources and in particular on analytics. And you can see I'm geared up for sports analytics today. And we have with us Dan and Matthew. And we're going to start. Let's just do the brief introduction. So Dan, where do you fit into the world of analytics and sports?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Dan Connerty. I'm a managing director here of Clutch Factor, which is a situational analytics company that we believe will revolutionize the way player evaluation methods in sports has been used as we know it. And I'll let Matt explain in high level detail what we think Clutch Factor could do in the private sector.
Absolutely. So as many know sports, I'm sure there'll be some people in the audience that have played before. You've played with some people and they just seem to execute when the game is on the line or when there's a game-winning situation going on. And for the longest time, the best way I could describe it is it's almost like a taboo in a sense where they're just like, oh, he has it or he doesn't. And a lot of people, if you can see it, the best way we could describe it is there's got to be a way to measure it. And I guess for the start, this all kind of originated from an argument I originally had with my father just before we started this company, where he actually approached me, and I was currently playing in NCAA at the time. And he was like, hey, son, do you think you could measure clutch? And at the time, I told him no. I was like, there's no way. Just based on my experience in sports, it's just kind of, you can identify with those people, but there's no real traits or things that I can point out. And as I continued my career, just in the NCAA amateur and professional sports, you come across more and more of those guys, and you realize there's a lot of discrepancies when it just comes to selection processes in general in sports, or just understanding your players as a whole. And what you find more often than not is you'll pick up guys that on paper, they're awesome. They have everything, every tangible you could ever look for. They look like they should fit the build, and then there's just something missing. There's a piece of the puzzle that isn't there. And that's where we kind of came in. And, at the end of the day, that what that really is clutch, and what we define clutch as, which is consistency. We found that the best players consistently perform at their best. And what that means is you have a baseline, and that baseline is where you stay at continuously. And obviously, there's a lot of synergy within the private sector, which is what we're extremely interested to move into. So I guess the best example I could give is it's very difficult to select people in high leverage, like closing roles, is the best way I could describe. Like if you talk to anyone in a sales org, we've had conversations with multiple leaders ourselves, and they'll say, I've hired people. They're amazing on paper. They look like they're going to be the best AE in the world. They come on, they onboard them, and they suck. And there's guys who just come in and they're like, I just want to try this out. I'm interested in the role, and they'll come in and do a stellar job. And we, again, see the synergies there in the private sector, where we can come help and just provide you with some data and insights that can allow you to make more strategic decisions and just essentially build a winning organization, whether that be within sports or private sector. And we're really excited to start delving into that and really seeing where the application is. But we truly believe we can really help expedite a lot of these processes. We can come in and basically help you save a ton of time just selecting people and making better informed decisions. And in turn, just have a better functioning organization, a winning org.
Now,
Also,
go ahead.
Also, maybe introduce yourself as well.
Oh,
what
yes,
you do for Clutch.
Yeah, I'll do it right now. My name is Matthew Linetto, also another managing director for Clutch. A little background about me. Known Dan pretty much my whole, I guess, young adulthood life. We originally met at BDG when it started. It was just like in the back of like a warehouse somewhere downtown, I think in North York, actually. And we were training there, and we ended up hitting it off. And then we ended up moving into BDG. So Dan ended up taking the helm of that and brought me in to somewhat run the hitting side. And that's where really my obsession with the analytical picture started to come in, where I started working with hitters, working with tech, tracking their numbers, like learning movement patterns, learning what pieces of data make sense, what don't. But again, the same thing with Dan is I've worked with guys that had everything on paper, all the tangible skill they needed in the world to perform at the next level. but they're just missing something. And where that comes in is where we're coming in, is just your mentality and how well you fit and how well you actually address high pressure scenarios and how well you execute within those.
So Dan, I wanted to go back to your work in player development.
Sure.
And just take us through the kinds of things you were doing with people and that were non-traditional, like they've been coaches forever, right? People involved in
Yep.
player development, but you were doing some more things with analytics and numbers than traditional. So tell us about what you did in baseball.
Yeah, so just jumping off of what Matt said. So I was the principal director of a company called Baseball Development Group, and Baseball Development Group was Canada's first data-driven baseball training center. And at the time when BDG first opened, baseball analytics were taking hold, obviously, in how players were shifted on the field and in-game situational critical thinking. But in terms of actually developing these players outside of, working on specific skill aspects in baseball itself, there wasn't metrics available for us to actively say that these things are improving the other. Back in 2012, 2013, there was no such thing as a Rhapsody. There was no such thing as a TrackMan. There was no such thing as, a baseball that could measure not only the speed of itself, but the spin rate, and you can get it at an affordable price. The only thing we had was the radar gun, right? And so when you think of the revolutionary aspects of physical development and training, and specifically baseball, these new metrics have created a full-on template that now in 2022 is a basis of how to develop players. And the more data you have, the more things that you can change.
Have you do you have an example of somebody you worked with? Have you worked with anybody famous who we would know?
Well, when I was at BDG, we had a ton of minor league players who have came through the door that are now currently working their way up to be at the major league level. I guess the most notable player, albeit not a pitcher and an outfielder, is a guy by the name of Denzel Clark. Denzel Clark was recently just included in the MLB Futures game, and he's working his way up in the Oakland Athletics organization. Great guy, so tangibly skilled, and I'm very excited that he's improving at the level that he is. But with those types of players that we ran through the door, it was a big question, as Matt brought up. We discussed, there must be a missing piece, because with the way physical analytics and measuring certain metrics of output have changed, at the time we thought, is there a possibility for us to measure something in the mental side of an athlete? In sports, it really is the missing piece of the analytic picture.
On the physical side, you're talking about the spin of the ball and the speed and all that kind. So if we're talking pitchers, and I know, Matt, you're probably more interested in hitters than pitchers, but
correct.
You have so much information about the physical movement, I guess, and the outcome of that physical movement, that any analytics pro can imagine how you can think we can try different things in how we do a pitch, and we can see how an individual is doing a pitch, and we have good data.
Yes.
And that's great, and that was revolution number one or number two in the world of baseball. But now, so now I'll let you segue into revolution. We'll call it number three, which is the soft side, which, as Matt originally said, no, we can't do that, and maybe figured out maybe we could. So let's talk about the soft side, so the mental side of the game. How on earth do you begin to assess that? What data can you use to judge that?
Well, so like Matt said, Richard Linetto, his father, ended up, he was a PhD psychologist at NYU, and one of his good friends at the time, Dr. Ed Levine, who was the professor emeritus at the University of South Florida for their industrial psych program for however many years. Both of them were big sports fans, and like Matt said, the conversation came about where, is it possible, if we can measure all these other physical variables of an athlete, to accurately measure the mental capacity or the mental capabilities of an athlete? And, Matt at first said no. When Richard approached me at the time, I said no too.
Okay, consensus.
Yeah, well, I said no too, because at the time I was thinking, clutch was an innate skill. You either had it or you didn't, right? And I didn't think it could be trained. But after creating version 1 of the assessment with Richard, Ed, and Matt and myself, we really came into effect to be able to start the correlations of what constituted clutch aspects of an athlete. And then I guess the biggest thing on our end, and it's, in private sector, it's what they're looking for is finding performance metrics to correlate to the data of your assessment. And what we've been able to do is, specifically at the collegiate baseball level, we've correlated our clutch factor scores, so the mental capabilities of an athlete, into a quantifiable and validated metric to performance outputs. Players who score higher on our assessment play better. Players who perform higher on our assessment perform better in higher leverage situations. And in terms of building out that next step of a revolutionary aspect, like you mentioned, revolutionary number 3 or revolution number 3,
Yeah.
if you're able to measure it in a development situation, in theory, you can train it. And the way we view it at Clutch Factor is, if you set a benchmark for a mental skills capabilities of an athlete, you can then actively measure, track, and train it over time to find improvement, find deficiencies, find strengths and weaknesses, and come up with ways to address those. And if you have that metric to actively track and measure over time, you should see improvement. And if you do see improvement, you should see improvement in play and performance for that player. So,
And so how does your assessment work? Like,
yeah.
what is it? Is it a pencil and paper quiz or brain scan, or what are you doing to people?
Right. So it's a digital assessment right now. It consists of 4 different sections. And one section specifically is an apperception section of the assessment, where a player is put into a situation with no defined outcome, and they have to answer specific key questions based off of that picture that they're putting themselves in. So an example would be, what are you feeling in this situation? What do you think is going to happen next in this situation? And based off of their answers to our key questions, it is run through our proprietary scoring algorithm and then creates an aggregated score, which we've termed the clutch factor score. And what we've done is your aggregated score across all 4 sections, with each having their own different scoring algorithm, creates that output that has been correlated to performance of certain players.
Yeah, and so what interests me about, I mean, as a sports fan, you say, great, this is a great tool. As a business professional, you say, in business, like we're totally familiar with IO psych test, which is the kind of assessment sound you have. IO psychologists would totally get what you're talking about. But in business, it's so hard to measure performance in many jobs that it can be hard to know. You're able to say, look, I'm going to take this test, I'm going to apply it to a human task, which we can measure extremely well. So it's kind of, we have this laboratory, and it's quite a sophisticated laboratory because it's professional sports. It's and you got lots of data, and you got good measurement. I mean, this is serious stuff, not just a bunch of undergrads in a classroom taking some tests. So you've got high quality data, and you're able to take a IO instrument measuring something we think is important and prove it there. And it's not a big stretch to say, you know what, all things considered, it makes sense that this tool is likely going to be effective in our environment. And given that we don't have anything, we're not doing this at all. I mean, we're hungry for anything that is going to give us an insight that maybe others don't have.
Yeah, well, but before I let Matt dive into that, I think the best thing about Clutch is a life skill. It's something that we found in athletes that you have it, and when you finish your career in your sports, you take that into whatever you do next. If I'm a star baseball player or football player and I go into the private sector and I end up running my own business, guess what? Those leadership qualities and traits that I have stay with me. And Clutch as a skill stays with you as well. And one thing that we've been very apparent with our assessment to do, because personality assessments in sports are very common. You can do a regular DISC assessment. You can get type A, type B, type C personalities and find an understanding of how to use them. but personalities muddles the water between a good personality and performance outputs. Clutch is very different. Clutch takes personality out of the room. It's purely an innate skill as to what constitutes that person's overall makeup. And what you're able to do with Clutch is say that me feeling confident all the time does not mean I'm going to be a better basketball player. But me being a more clutch athlete means, for the most part, at a very highly predictive level, I will be. So when we're looking at it from an IO psychology perspective, I'll let Matt talk about it. That's the way we're viewing our assessment as it moves into the next avenue. Is personality only goes so far. It's a good stretch as to get an understanding of who you are and who your employees are, but personality is not the whole shebang per se, right? We're looking for that next step, and we believe that Clutch has the ability to take the assessment in that type of an avenue to the next level.
So Matt, and we'll get you to unmute yourself here. Just to wrap things up here, we have an interesting case study of how analytics advanced in the world of sports, and how useful it was for selection and development, and picking up on not just hard skill factors like how you throw a ball or how you swing the bat, but also a personality trait, which becomes interesting because we say now we've discovered something about humans that we can measure that has applicability to performance in a wide range of fields. So, we should do a call with your dad and Dr. Levine sometime to see, from the academic perspective. But what's going to happen in the world of sports analytics, and where is that going to take us into the world of business analytics?
Absolutely. I mean, we're incredibly excited to move out of baseball. Obviously, we started in baseball. Dan and I are lifers in the sport. Easiest one for us to move into first, had the most connections, but we really at the start saw this as like an assessment platform that can be applied in many facets. We didn't want to isolate ourselves just in sports as a whole. And I guess the best way I can describe it is, especially now in modern day business, the majority of large data companies that exist are data insight companies. People are willing to pay an arm and a leg to have any competitive edge, right? It's the same in sports, it's the same in private sector. And we love sports, it's a little more transparent, but it applies the same once you move into a business or a large organization, whether that be, you're onboarding some people or you're going through a hiring process, you're trying to make proper selections for individuals in very high pressure, highly strategic roles. You want every little piece of data you can possibly gather on them. And to us, it's just an extra piece of data and insights that you can leverage to essentially just make a better analytical decision on how you structure your organization, where you place people, why they're there, and essentially just maybe giving you that extra nudge or that extra piece of security that you are looking for to ensure that you've made the right choices to essentially build a winning organization. And we think that applies to way more than sports. We look at a lot of things in general, like sports as a whole, I think are incredibly similar to a lot of other organizations and a lot of other roles. And Dan mentioned it too, like clutch is a life skill. I love sports because it taught me a ton of traits, like ton of character traits and different ways to pursue through adversity and how to address pressure, right? Some people actually just don't have that. And what we want to be able to do, one, is proactively identify those individuals that actually have the innate ability to do so on a actual measured, like predictive scale. And two, we want to be able to take individuals that may be lacking at the time, but we want to help them. We want to help them fit into their roles better, give them some advice, essentially just improve efficiency of outputs of all orgs, whether that be sports or private sector as a whole.
Yeah, so player development once again. So let's wrap this up, and I want to thank you for sharing your work and how you're advancing the field of analytics from a different direction. I'm going to put you on the spot just to close out on something informal. Matthew, who's your favorite athlete of all time?
Favorite athlete of all time. This is going to be super controversial, but it's just because I love his swing. But Barry Bonds, I love Barry Bonds.
It is controversial.
All right, we'll have another video on Barry Bonds. Dan, your favorite athlete of all time?
It broke down into two folds. I was a big Roy Halladay fan growing up. His demeanor, the way he carried himself, and obviously, I wanted to look like him and ended up being as tall as him, pretty much the similar build. But someone who's really, I want to say, been someone I've been trying to emulate myself is probably more along the lines of Derek Jeter, someone who's just universally respected as being a leader in his field across the board, wasn't afraid to step on toes if he needed to, but he was known as a winner and he was known as being successful in everything that he's done and continues to do so. So those would be my two picks.
Well, I won't name my favorite Leaf because I love them all, but I'll name my favorite.
That's a different list in itself.
Different list, yeah. My favorite ex-Leaf, which I'm clear about, is Nazem Kadri. So
okay.
Here's a shout out to Mr. Kadri and all he's done for the teams he's played for. Thanks again, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.